Global health is a challenging cross-cutting issue. Without health infrastructure and a reasonable level of wellness, it can be difficult to accelerate economic growth. A collective effort to achieve the Millennium Development Goals has reduced child mortality, reinforced maternal health, and dramatically reduced the global incidence of HIV/AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis. But a great deal more remains to be done to assure the health of the world's people. We're excited to have Devex moderating the online conversation at, and I'll say it correctly this time, hashtag Catalyze with a Z 14. That's hashtag Catalyze 14, all one word. Katie Taylor, Deputy Assistant Administrator, Bureau for Global Health at USAID, is here with us, as well as Tom Hart, U.S. Executive Director for the One Campaign, and Leigh Verbois, Director of International Programs at the Asia Pacific at the Food and Drug Administration. And they're all here to talk with me today about where we stand on global health issues and how cross-sector partnerships can afford healthier lives for more people. So Katie, let me start with you. You spent more than 20 years with GE Healthcare before coming to your current role at USAID. As someone with a background in the private sector, and now you're dealing a lot with, as we were just talking about, with children and maternal health, where do you see the opportunities and the need in that area?
Well, ending preventable child and maternal death is actually within our grasp. There are still 6.6 million children under 5 dying every year, but when you compare that to 1990, when it was 12.6, that's a huge advance.
That's dramatic.
It is. And we could only do that if we do it together. It's the alignment between public and private, between for-profit and non-profit, governments and civil society that can make that possible. Now, what does that mean? Right. Let me give you an example.
Yeah.
Of all the children who die every year, almost 3 million are newborn. And the World Health Organization estimates that almost 1 million of the newborn, of the babies, die from asphyxia. They can't breathe. So we at USAID have partnered with other organizations, public and private, to create a partnership called Helping Babies Breathe. This includes the American Academy of Pediatrics, Laerdal, I mean, all sorts of partners. We've reached, in 3 years, 60 countries. We've trained 130,000 people, and the results in Tanzania alone show a reduction to almost half.
That's incredible. And these are babies that the mother can't get to the hospital. I mean, what is behind it, and how are you addressing it?
So babies can't breathe. Sometimes it's mucus. It's something simple. And so there are very simple ways that you can train a midwife or a nurse.
So it doesn't have to mean you have to reach a hospital.
With simple, just someone who's had that training. We have a baby mannequin called neonatally. And to train a nurse or a midwife on how to unblock the baby's nasal passages so they can actually take that first breath of life.
Right. And what was wrong before? Just it was not a knowledge as to how to do it? So it's just about training
One
and
of the
education?
things the private sector does brilliantly is take knowledge to scale.
Yeah.
Now, in the private sector, you call it a market.
Yeah.
In public health, we call it saving a life.
Oh, that's
but
a
it's the
great
same
point.
thing.
And so that's how many babies can we save with that?
Hundreds of thousands.
And so then just briefly, the next several million babies, what are the efforts to save them?
So we're expanding the partnerships. Laerdal is committing increased funds. But this is the sort of effort where, I'm just giving you one example. Right. There are others. There are other innovations that are vital. I mean, there's something that USAID, again, in our Saving Lives at Birth Grand Challenge with the Gates Foundation and DFID and others, we're trying to bring innovations to life. Another example is, and this helps mothers, there are about 800 women a day who die from obstructed labor, who die in childbirth. There hadn't been an innovation since forceps 40 years ago. A car mechanic from Argentina named Jorge Odon figured out, he was watching a documentary on how to get a cork out of a bottle. And his first sort of model was with a jar and his daughter's doll and getting a little something that his wife set up to try to figure out how could you extract the doll from the jar without breaking it. And essentially that is the Odon device. It's going to be commercialized, manufactured by Becton Dickinson, and it's it's these partnerships.
How did he come? How did you find him? How did he come to life?
Our Saving Lives at Birth Grand Challenge, which has been it's going into its 4th year now, where the idea is to bring creativity from around the world. Over half of the folks who applied, it's these reasonably small grants.
Right.
That are just to take the seed of an idea and see if it's possible.
And so interesting too, because a solution like that, as you just pointed out, doesn't have to come from U.S. pharma. It came from, this guy in Argentina.
But we need both.
You need both, but you need both. But the point is, it's everywhere. The solutions are everywhere, and there needs to be reach to find them.
And then there's the behaviors.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the tried and true, and that's where each one of us can make a difference.
Right.
Things like breastfeeding. If we could get breastfeeding rates up to maybe 60% exclusive breastfeeding
and
in the
what
first
are they now?
In some countries, they're stagnating at 30% or lower. We could save almost 1 million lives a year in the 24 countries that we focus on that represent over 70% of child and maternal mortality, just by promotion of breastfeeding over a 5-year period.
Right. And Tom, you're very much at the center of these issues. From your perspective, what do you see as the biggest gaps in this area, in broadly, health, global health issues?
Thanks. I think the biggest gaps at this point, I want to both underscore the achievements that Katie just talked about, the sort of staggering steps forward that have been made in fighting HIV/AIDS, in fighting malaria and child maternal health. The gap is complacency. In the United States, HIV is a manageable chronic disease. People in the United States have no idea what malaria is. And yet, every minute, a child dies of malaria, death from mosquito bite. And 3 people die of HIV. These are diseases that we can go to the local pharmacy and get the drugs. And yet, in the minute that I answer this question, another round of people have passed away because of them. So we can't be complacent about them. And I think what it demands from us is, look, we have to gang up on this problem. It really, like you said, Katie, it's going to take governments who really can do big things that corporations and individuals can't do. It is going to take individuals, it's going to take churches and foundations and all of us taking an effort. Let me just give one example of an institution we work closely with, and I know the US government does as well, and it's called Gavi. It's the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunizations. And it quite literally sits foundations, the world's biggest governments, individuals, and corporations, pharmaceutical companies around a table to figure out how are we going to get vaccines into kids' arms around the world who couldn't get them otherwise. And the pharmaceutical company works on bringing market the vaccines, and Gavi actually helps create a market. I mean, why would Merck, there's not much of a market in one small sub-Saharan African country, but you pool all of those sub-Saharan African countries together and all of a sudden you've got a market to work with. So Gavi is an institution that the United States government supports, the Gates Foundation supports, and so many others. And it does an incredible job at working with partner organizations like UNICEF and others in getting shots in kids' arms. They have saved 6 million kids' lives to date. They're on track to save another 6 million and help lower that newborn mortality rate. Very, very exciting. But
so how many kids do we have to go?
Well, I think
what are the numbers
in
terms of vaccinations? How many kids don't get vaccinations and need to?
Well, of course, every day new babies are born and need to be vaccinated.
Right,
so Gavi has a plan for over the next 5 years to get another 6 million kids vaccinated. So.
And part of what Gavi's done so brilliantly is help to promote new vaccines. Because it's not just the measles and others, it's things, and polio, of course, but it's things like new vaccines like rotavirus or pneumococcal. So 2 of the biggest killers of children under 5 are pneumonia and diarrhea. And these vaccines are getting introduced in a number of these countries.
And just going back to malaria briefly, I mean, we all heard about the very cost-effective use of nets, and it seemed like things were going really well on the malaria front. Are they not now? I mean,
No, there's still tremendous progress. I mean, I think there are 11 African countries where they've cut deaths from malaria by 75%. They're through these low-cost interventions, from mosquito nets to treatment, to indoor residual spraying, which all are very low tech and inexpensive, and we know they work.
Right.
We just have to, these aren't matters of whether we know how to beat these diseases, it's a matter of whether we want to.
But again, I mean, what's the obstacle on malaria? I mean, is it local governments?
It's lots of things. It's from
money,
funding. Yeah, it's sheer funding for the interventions and getting the bed nets out to people. It is knowledge, so that the bed nets are used appropriately and hung, and getting rid of still water and all sorts of other things. And look, let's be honest. In sub-Saharan Africa, in remote parts that have a heavy burden of malaria, a lot of it is knowledge and being able to get these interventions out and teach people how to use them properly.
So Leigh, you're with the FDA. And the prevalence of counterfeit drugs and falsified medical devices undermines progress in the global health space, causing both drug resistance and ill-conceived effects. What is the FDA's approach to tackling that?
So our approach is multifaceted. We really are looking to understand how we can prevent the introduction of products, counterfeit, substandard products entering the marketplace. We want to detect products if they're found, and we really want to collectively respond quickly when products are found. So to address the comments on malaria, products that don't have active ingredient in them are ineffective, and that undermines our ability to address issues like malaria and other diseases that are occurring internationally and have a widespread amount of counterfeit drugs in circulation. So we as an agency are really working to understand what different mechanisms we can use for prevention, what different mechanisms we can use for detection. And we have used a number of different ways in which we're engaging with public-private partnerships to provide innovative tools to the field and test different detection technologies to really get a clear understanding for how technology can really help move us to a place where we understand whether products are quality products. Another thing is, unlike the numbers that they have used, we don't necessarily have a clear understanding of the clear numbers of counterfeit and substandard products that are in marketplaces. And so we're working with organizations like the WHO to develop a surveillance platform that will help us really start to collect the information holistically across all regions of the world so that regulators and enforcement officials can be informed when there are products in their marketplace, or they can at least know when they need to be on the lookout. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to lose those public health gains that we've made over the last decade because patients are being treated with drugs that are not quality products.
Do you have any numbers to give us a sense of how big the problem is, or whether is it growing?
So, I can't give firm numbers because what we really do want to underline is that we don't have systems currently in place that can really identify all of the products that are in circulation. I could throw numbers out, but I think that I would be literally throwing numbers out. And the programs that we're trying to institute are really programs that are bringing us to a better understanding of the types of products that are in circulation. We understand that no products are not at risk for counterfeiting and adulteration. And so we're really trying to work with public and private partnerships. We're trying to work with industry to really clearly identify a strategy for addressing this problem.
Any examples of that? Specific companies, specific products?
Not specific companies, but I mentioned the counterfeit detection device. We're actually working with USAID and the United States Pharmacopoeia and Ghanaian regulatory authorities to test a tool in Ghana to determine what the marketplace looks like. USP has an ongoing surveillance effort it's funded through USAID, and it's a very strong program. So we're leveraging existing infrastructure that's in place in different countries to test innovative technologies and try to put it in the hands of those who can use it the most.
So what about partnering with the partnerships, public, private, NGO? How is that working? What's the status of that relationship now?
Well, I think it's working extraordinarily well,
okay.
But there's so much more that needs to be done. And because one of the things, we sometimes think of health as a very technical or clinical area, but health in a developing country is completely multi-sectoral. So Tom was saying earlier in the hallway over there, Power Africa, for instance, is vital to health, because if you don't have access to energy so that your vaccine is refrigerated, it would lose its potency.
Right.
If you don't have access to power to, when you're trying to deliver a baby in the middle of the night by cesarean section, I mean, there are all these things that are interrelated and cross-sectoral, and we need to address them together. They're not in isolation. One of the innovations that we've been helping to promote is actually innovations on how to bring like a solar suitcase for in a health clinic in a very remote or rural area.
Yeah, that's been a USAID initiative,
Right,
hasn't
exactly.
it? Yeah. And Tom, what's your sense?
We've seen an extraordinary leap forward in public-private partnerships. I think from corporations gathering around great institutions like Gavi to promote vaccines, or the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria. Corporations and citizens play a vital role in helping raise the funds to take some of the solutions to scale, as you talked about. I think, equally, but I would love to see more is more asserted effort on behalf of private citizens and private corporations and foundations in raising their voices. I work for an organization whose job it is to raise attention and awareness and advocacy for the things that we know work. I got to tell you, these two have tough jobs. They work in a city that is much maligned around the country, and everybody discounts what Washington does. Nothing ever gets done anymore. I'll tell you what's gotten done. In 2002, 50,000 people in Africa had antiretrovirals. Today, 7.5 million Africans have antiretrovirals. That is due almost entirely because of the U.S. government and its politicians, with the support from citizens, decided that we weren't going to let that case remain, and decided to do something about it. So advocacy and support to tackle these big, giant, difficult global health problems needs support, and I think companies and individuals really need to provide it.
You've been at the center of watching companies step up their efforts on all of these fronts. Where do you see them doing well, and where do you see them making mistakes? And can you give us specific examples?
Sure. I see them doing incredible work in terms of their innovation, the ideas, the impatience, which I think is really good for the NGO and the government sector. I love that.
How so? Can you give me an example of that?
You don't, not that companies can't be bureaucratic. They can be, but
Right.
there is an impatience to, I think it's helping us redefine what the bottom line is. We're fighting for people who don't have anything and don't have a voice in this town. And I think the private sector can help us really focus on what our bottom lines are and help us brush away we get into techno speak and we love our little lingo and our stats and all the rest. But at the end of the day, if we're really going to make transformative difference, we're going to have to be pretty impatient. And I think the private sector does really well at helping us do that.
What do you think?
I think I completely agree with Tom. I think one of the challenges is also how do you get private sector and civil society in these countries to help? For instance, the faith sector. Churches and mosques can play a huge role in helping to make sure that a pregnant woman can get to a clinic to deliver, or get 4 antenatal care visits, or promote breastfeeding. I mean, how do you get these connections between the global private sector, global advocacy, and folks in country?
So let's be specific here, though. Let's say you were going to put people around a table to solve one problem. What's that problem out there? And who should be at the table?
So, for instance, as I mentioned, one of the big killers of children is diarrhea.
Right.
Well, there's actually a very simple remedy for diarrhea. It's zinc or ORS. It's basically sugar, water, and salt in a particular combination with zinc that can save children's lives. And it's cheap, it's easy, and we've known about it for 30 or 40 years. I think now we have a sufficient momentum and understanding and mobilization that these deaths could be preventable. There's going to be a meeting in Nigeria, the most populous country in Africa, and a very complicated one in May, bringing together all the faith sector, Muslim and Christian alike, around trying to figure out how do we bring zinc ORS to the hundreds of thousands of children.
But will the private
who are
sector
dying.
be there? The people with
Absolutely.
transportation?
Yes,
and
yes. Coca-Cola.
That's
Absolutely.
Coca-Cola has been very effective, I think, haven't they?
Absolutely.
And can you describe those efforts?
So we're working with Coca-Cola as well as others. I mean, we just launched a Global Development Lab last week at USAID, where we're bringing together Walmart, Coca-Cola, DuPont, Cargill, as well as universities like Duke and MIT, as well as nonprofits like Save the Children and CARE, to bring science, technology, and innovation in partnership around resolving just these issues.
But I was going to bring up Coke just because the specifics of Coke knows how to get that bottle of Coke, right? Can you talk about that?
Well, I've seen it. If you can get a fizzy drink to any sub-Saharan African village, surely you could get a vaccine.
Right.
So let's tap into that knowledge and those distribution systems and work with them, and we do.
So one thing that I think each of you have said, it's knowledge and motivation. So it's enabling people to clearly understand what the problem is, whether it's generating excitement over what the potential is for a project, but getting everyone you need around the table. And the truth of the matter is, I think you need to kind of generate that group of people more broadly and not narrowly in the beginning, so that people who are talking to as many diverse opinions about a problem that they can. And that really kind of gets an industry and an issue to the forefront and energizes people to do better.
And go ahead.
I was just going to say, and we should think about global health slightly more broadly than we do now, and I wanted to tap into something that Katie raised earlier. Lack of electricity. Major global health issue, wouldn't think that was obvious. But until you start thinking about what it means to an African villager who doesn't have any electricity.
Right.
She probably cooks her evening meal inside over an open fire, and her kids study over a kerosene lamp, which is spewing toxic fumes. More people die from inhaling the toxic fumes from smoke and kerosene than AIDS and malaria combined.
Wow. I don't think people generally know that.
That's
yeah.
a global health
Yeah.
catastrophe.
Right.
Are there any businesses that know anything about getting energy to people? Probably better than governments and NGOs. So there's a case where it's essential, clear global health priority, where the private sector has got knowledge, experience, and innovation that can help the governments and NGOs get things done.
So what companies are stepping up to that plate? Are you asking them to step up to that plate?
Oh, they're already at the plate.
Okay.
Companies like GE and Symbian and others are working with the Obama administration on this exciting initiative called Power Africa. There's complementary legislation in the House and soon to be in the Senate, which would generate tens of thousands of megawatts of new power, not just in industrial complexes in Africa, but in rural villages. We've got to think about innovative off-grid, renewable energy like solar, wind, geothermal, and others. Again, private sector companies thinking a lot more about that than we are. So we do
this
have
is
to
your
harness.
opportunity here for you guys to say to companies that aren't involved in this sphere, step up to the plate, and here's the opportunity. Where would you encourage them to look? You mentioned the anti-diarrheal medicine, but are there other areas that you think that they can step up to the plate?
So I think one of the things that's important to say is you don't need to have technical, clinical expertise. It's wonderful to have medical device companies and pharmaceutical companies involved. Their knowledge is extraordinary and vital. And yet there's so much that every single business out there can do. If you have an employee somewhere, you have an export office, you have a way of connecting with citizens or governments in one of these countries where the need and the mortality is high, then there's something that can be done from promoting a particular, starting with the health of employees in these countries. To engaging with the communities, and many of the the mining companies do it, the oil companies do it. It's a question of how do you then leverage that beyond just that small community and make it just a way of life, and then bring in local private sector who may not have all of the knowledge or tools.
And is the way that the private sector doing this different? Your one campaign means everybody should invest 1%, correct?
That's part of it, yeah. I can explain more, yeah.
Yeah, why don't you explain it? But just going back to the question of foreign public assistance, A, do you see it kind of plateauing? And B, is the way that companies are approaching this, you mentioned impatience, which was a good comment, but is the way that companies and private sector doing it different than the way governments are doing it?
Yes. I think it's both different and similar in lots of helpful ways. I mean, look, we're an organization that campaigns for better policy, more funding to help end extreme poverty and to fight preventable disease, like we've been talking about. Extraordinary progress when the US government and other governments around the world get together and decide to tackle a big problem like malaria or vaccines or HIV. I think companies, I agree that they have been at the table, they provided their innovation, their impatience, their different lens on the new problem, or on ancient problems, which is probably more important for us to not just continue to do what we've always done and expect to get a different result. That's, I think, the definition of insanity. So, I think we really welcome everyone to the table, because if we're not ganging up on these big problems, we're not going to solve them.
What are some examples of things where you keep spinning the wheel and nothing gets done?
Well, so something, again, I go back to what's simple, because one of the beauties of the private sector, I came from the private sector, is the ability to simplify. Simplify, motivate, show line of sight to where you're trying to go.
Right.
Hand washing. Unilever, for instance, done a brilliant job in the hand washing space. Hand washing could prevent so many infections, so much of the causes of diarrhea, for instance, as well as others. If you could get hand washing rates up, it's a huge prevention mechanism. So if you could get all companies to focus on hand washing, something as simple as that, wash your hands with soap and water throughout the day. It took us long enough in this country. You get folks motivated and mobilized around something really simple, but that everyone can do, that can make a difference.
Further thought?
So I'd like to kind of tie into that, and I think that it's great to mobilize around one issue. It's even better to bring together massive energy around multiple issues. And so really trying to tackle problems not from a singular focus, but from a multifaceted approach where you're bringing together different stakeholders who have very different ideas of what could happen and how we should tackle problems, but really everyone comes together collectively and chooses what they should work on. It doesn't have to be a single thing, and I think USAID is doing a very good job of that in their mothers campaigns. But making sure that you have the people at the table who can really take things and run with them and feel comfortable that it doesn't have to be a singular attack.
So we have to wrap up now. Thank you, all three of you. That was an incredibly insightful session. Thank you. And I love the optimism.